You're listening to Politics Within Reason, the official podcast of the Party of Reason in Progress.
You're listening to Politics Within Reason. I'm Samuel Jennings, and with me are Brett Kokinadis and Michael Ham. This week we are going to talk about what we are going to talk about, which is, I know, funny, but we're also going to talk about the AltRight and what you can do to put a bug in the ear of your representatives. Now, Michael, why don't you tell us something new?
All right. Have you heard about this one, Sam? It's probably raining diamonds on Uranus, the most infamous planet out there. There's a new article in Nature Astronomy that posits that it's very likely that it's raining diamonds on Uranus and Neptune right now as we speak.
Well, that's interesting. So the intense gravity and pressure on Uranus compresses the carbon down and is powerful enough to agitate it up.
That's right. And it rains diamonds. Maybe. Hopefully one day we'll get to go find out.
Yes. It's a little hard to land on Uranus to check in person.
That's right.
Let's get to the news.
It's our first time doing a second segment. Normally this segment is going to be about news stories that we want to bring your attention to. And I think the biggest news story we can talk about, of course, is why we aren't going to make this a Trump-focused podcast.
Why we aren't going to make it a Trump-focused podcast. Okay, that does sound like a good idea. So why don't you tell me your thoughts on that?
There's just too many things that happen, right? By the time you finish recording an episode, everything has changed. There's something new to focus on. We need to not be the big mouth bass. Have you ever gone fishing for big mouth bass? It's a lot of fun, right? Because all you got to do is put something shiny in the water and they go for it. There's just so many shiny things that come around. And there's a whole lot of other podcasts or news sources you can go to that do a great job of covering the latest and greatest news that concern Trump.
And I think
we're going to have a very hard time competing with CNN.
Plus, I think we're trying to maybe tone it down a bit so we're not giving everyone a panic attack. I mean, you turn on CNN, it seems like every 15 minutes there's a breaking news bulletin.
Right. We're really trying to focus on things we can do to improve the future. And that's going to take time, and that requires not just, as Brett was saying, going off into a panic attack about every little thing.
So we're not going to spend our time every week talking only about Donald Trump. I'm sure he'll come up. He always has a way of doing it. But hopefully we should be able to find you some news items this week that are interesting and relevant and don't have anything to do, or at least directly to do, with the top 3 things that Donald Trump has done this week.
Or the last hour, right?
Yeah,
yes, or the last.
And don't forget, too, if you guys find something that you want to, have us research and talk about, too, you can always call us and participate in the show by calling 202-681-2274 and leave us a message. We'll be happy to take your thoughts into consideration and see if we want to put them on the show.
That's right. And the focus of this podcast really is to identify these issues that we can have an impact on and you and the audience can get involved with. One of the interesting things that we're going to get to later on in the show is that if a large number of people call about a specific issue, your representatives will pay attention. And we're going to try and bring those stories about where we might be able to have an impact. And we really can't break through the noise on just the Trump stories.
Yeah, plus, recently Porp got blocked by Trump, too, on Twitter.
That's right. And I say good. Let's move on. But it'll be interesting because our children, our children's children will have to learn what a Twitter is and why everybody thought it was such a big deal.
There have been increased rumors circulating around Washington, D.C. and the mainstream media about the possible end to the DACA program.
And the DACA
Deferred
program.
Action. Yeah, it stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. At least I think
it's it's also called the Dreamer program, isn't it? Or the Dream?
It's related to the Dreamer program.
Yeah. I saw it today,
it has
actually.
some very strict requirements.
It does. And I saw on AJ, though, they were saying that if it does successfully get removed, that over the next decade or so, it's going to have over a $400 billion impact to our economy.
Right. So what is DACA? Just real quick, what is it, so that anybody who's listening that doesn't really have a firm grasp on it?
What DACA does is it allows hundreds of thousands of immigrant teenagers who are the undocumented, or often called illegal immigrants, depending what crowd you're in. They get to go about their lives without the constant fear of deportation. They came here as children, right? What they did is they were good kids. They listened to their parents, and their parents brought them over here, and they didn't know they were breaking the law. they've had their entire life as an American citizen. And what DACA is a program that Barack Obama initiated that allowed them to do things like get valid driver's licenses or even buy homes and get jobs legally.
Yeah. And, we talk to these people who are brought here by their parents when they're underage. They don't have a say in how they immigrate to the United States or what they do when they get here. But we talk to them and we tell them that if they register with the government and they check in every 2 years, that we will let them work, that we will let them live, that we will let them build a life, go to school, do all the normal American things. Right. By ending that program, by ending those renewals, we would be taking people, a lot of whom only speak English or have only ever really remembered being in America, and taking them and pushing them out of this country or turning them into undocumented immigrants.
And as Brett said, this country has invested a huge amount of money in training them to be the next generation, right? They're already integrating into our lives. They're doing jobs. They've been trained here. It makes sense to integrate them in. And it has a hard cutoff time. There is, I forget the exact date, but you have to have immigrated before a certain date, and that's not going to be extended.
Yeah, the only thing I think that they can't do from when I was doing research on it was they can travel or they can apply to travel internationally, but only for certain situations, and that's like education, family emergencies, and things like that. But like international leisure travel is not permitted under DACA.
Right, so that's something that we should pay attention to as it goes forward. And there's nothing firm that I've heard on that. But that is a major threat. That's the possibility of taking 800,000 Americans and taking their documents away. So let's keep an eye on that as it goes forward. And, to any of you, be sure to read up on it yourself and pay attention and think about getting involved.
And if we've missed any aspect of the story, give us a call. And hey, guys, can I make a plug?
Yeah.
When I did the interview with Dennis Dinge, which will be our first interview, he talked a good bit about immigration. I think you should listen to him and look for that pod coming out.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so there was 800,000 people in DACA, enrolled in DACA now, or I should say approximately, because I think the numbers fluctuate each year depending on the renewal status and stuff like that. But I mean,
it's about 100,000 or 800,000. Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, to put that in perspective, I know. What is it? That's like 50% of Phoenix, and I know you guys did some research on that for like a comparison to how many people that represents in our country.
That's right. So here's the fun ones, right? It's more people than live in Wyoming, and almost as many as live in Montana.
Yeah. So think about taking every single person in one of those states and taking their ability to legally work in the United States and legally go to college, taking that away. That could be devastating.
And once again, these are the people who came as children, right? They listened to their parents. They were good kids. They came over here. They didn't know they were doing it illegally. And this just gives them a way to take advantage of that investment America has already made in them.
Yeah, so I think we can all say here, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but we think they should stay, right? I mean, what is our opinion? Porp's opinion.
I think they're Americans.
I think they are. And I also agree that we need to do a better job with how we do immigration. But this is part of it. This is part of doing a better job of immigration.
Yeah, and a legal way to citizenship at some point.
Absolutely.
Right.
This week in history, in 1916, the National Park Service is established as part of the Department of the Interior. Americans love their national parks.
Every single year, we're breaking records of national park attendance, which is why I thought it was great that we were expanding national monuments and making more and more of this resource available. Economic activity doesn't just come from mining on this land.
Yeah, not only do we get quite a bit of use out of our national parks via tourism, but they're important wildlife refuges and important sources of scientific research.
And hunting and fishing and other outdoor activities as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing that happened this last week was August 26th was set aside to celebrate the 19th Constitutional Amendment, giving the right to vote to women. And this is the 97th year of women having that right to vote.
How old would you guess the League of Women Voters is?
Oh, I'd say probably about 97 years.
Absolutely. And if you don't know who the League of Women Voters are, they usually put out a list of all the candidates and interviews for all your local, state, and federal candidates. They do a really great job, and they're nonpartisan.
And I believe they run the United States presidential debates, or at least a significant portion of them.
I believe that is correct.
So in depth this week in this podcast, we want to talk a little bit about the Antifa and the alt-right. And starting in 2016 election was the first time we saw the virtual and real world start to interact so aggressively in politics. It's only going to get weirder. So Mike, I know you've been pretty passionate about this topic this week. Can you tell us a little bit about your discovery and research?
Absolutely, Brett. Thanks. This will just be my take on the issue. So please give us a call and give us your take as well. My take on this, the alt-right, is that it really kicked off when Richard Spencer, who's a white nationalist, began pushing the term alt-right. And Steve Bannon, who was the editor and is now again the editor of Breitbart, recognized that he could make a home for the alt-right. It's a really interesting relationship with people like Richard Spencer. So Richard Spencer has a wife named Nina Kupriyanova, which I probably am getting very wrong and apologize for that, who is a student of Alexander Dugin, who wrote The Foundation of Geopolitics. And The Foundation of Geopolitics is this really fascinating book, a guiding force for Russian leadership. And one of the things that Foundation of Geopolitics is trying to do is set Russia up to be more powerful than it was. And one of the ways to do that is to weaken the United States by fueling instability and separatism by provoking, for example, racism. We saw that come to a head in Charlottesville, where they had the rally to unite the right, which was, of course, headlined by Richard Spencer. And, of course, infamously at this rally, there were Nazis who ended up killing a woman named Heather Heyer. And there were also incidents where a KKK Grand Wizard, I believe it was, actually tried to shoot at a black man, but his gun jammed, and so he ended up shooting into a bush. It was a really just bizarre rally. What really stood out is how the alt-right was very comfortable not marching next to people carrying Nazi flags. The rally was, in theory, supposed to be about the heritage of the Confederate statues. But what we saw is that the people who were wearing the Confederate cosplay were not telling the Nazis to go away, right? The Nazis have no claim to Confederate statues. You know, if you see a Nazi in your rally, there's only one good American response, and that's to tell them to get lost. So that gets us to Antifa. The provocation is, of course, the Nazis showing up and actually trying to provoke a reaction. And when that fails, they're willing to murder people, as we saw. But what Antifa is the counter-reaction. And I think it's important to talk about how there are multi-levels of what you might consider Antifa. There's usually just one that's presented in the media. On the very high level would be the anti-fascists. If you're an American who hates Nazis, you're an anti-fascist. That's just a pretty simple point of view. But if you're an American who hates Nazis and takes time out of their day to actually go to these Nazi rallies and yell and scream at them, you might be part of what's been called kind of colloquially Antifa. And Antifa is a very nebulous idea. It's just people who go to these rallies, and there's all types. There's religious leaders all the way down to kids looking to pick a fight, obviously, as we see in the news. Nancy Pelosi actually just released a statement, which I think was very good of her, saying, you know, this cannot be tolerated. Going out and attacking people who may even be trying to provoke you with their speech is not acceptable. Don't physically attack them. What I want to get at then is that there is a group within the Antifa, which has been sort of known online as the Black Bloc. That refers to the clothing they wear. They end up going out in black face masks and black clothing, and they are purposely looking to go attack Nazis. There's a very famous video of one of these Black Bloc members running up and punching Richard Spencer in the face. Whatever you think of that, the problem is it gives a sympathy to these people who are putting on the Nazi rallies. I think Brett said it best. He had a pretty good strategy for how you might deal with the idea that there are Nazis holding rallies.
Yeah, I mean, you go out and what happened in Charlottesville, you saw people walking around with tiki torches. Obviously, it escalated to something horrible, and violence isn't really the answer. You know, MSNBC reported on a gentleman by the name of Logan Smith that started a Twitter handle called Yes, You're Racist. And, you know, the idea of arming yourself to go to these rallies or protests, you know, arm yourself with a camera phone, a Twitter handle, and a hashtag. We saw after Charlottesville what happened to some of these people getting outed on Facebook. I know or on Twitter, some of them were, you know, with employers that didn't take too kindly to that. Some other folks said that they had to relocate because they didn't know what they were going to do. These guys are bullies, right? They're standing out there trying to make a scene. Some of them are violent, some of them are not. They're just joining in their pack. But once they start getting identified and you have a real name
and become separated from that pack through that method.
And you should be able to do what you need to protect yourself and to protect others. But I'm from Seattle, and in Seattle, we've always had a significant movement out here of the Black Bloc anarchists. And it's really what they are, that dedicated core who is inciting violence at these white nationalist counter-protest movements. The Black Bloc are people that show up dressed in black with the sole intention of inciting violence or damaging property.
The point is that these Black Bloc members are not in good standing with anybody who matters politically, right?
Right.
These are a bit like a wild dog that's running around, and yes, they're biting Nazis, but they're not our dog, right? They are not our rabid dog.
Antifa is a movement with no head. It is an amorphous blob. It is something that just refers to everybody that shows up to counter-protest white nationalism. Now, we know that these white nationalists, these Nazis, Confederate rights people, the movement for white supremacy in the United States is violent and has behaved in a violent method towards counter-protesters. So you should feel like you may have to defend yourself and you may have to defend other people, but by attacking them, you give them the platform to cast themselves as the victim. By defending yourself and defending somebody else, you set yourself up with a more powerful platform and a more powerful message.
Right.
So
when Nazis are involved, it's really easy to have the high road, right? It's really easy to not be a Nazi. And so don't give them any reason that they can get some kind of sympathy for a violation of, for example, their free speech rights, which they do have in the United States. We should also point out, too, that not all or even a majority of these alt-right folks or people who are sympathetic to the alt-right are Nazis. It's just that it was a little disconcerting in Charlottesville. What really turned people off was to see all these folks willingly march with the Nazis and then to have a Nazi actually commit a terrorist act in America. A woman actually died at the hands of the Nazis. A woman died standing up to the Nazis.
Right. And we should remember that so much within the alt-right is not an explicit endorsement of Nazism. It is just a recasting of white supremacy in a more attractive coat. It is what we refer to as a dog whistle. So you're using coded language which is not quite as offensive as what you really mean, but which the people that you're talking to will understand.
And let's talk about something that was really interesting before we finish on this topic, is that they're very media savvy. They're very, very good at this. And if you ever look at Clint Watt's project, who's just a really amazing American national security guy, Clint Watts, he's got this securingdemocracy.org website. And you can look at the dashboard and you can see what the Russian bots that are helping the alt-right are tweeting about. And one of their big pushes this last week has been Antifa. And they're really excited when they can push images of anyone who's counter-protesting the alt-right being violent because it helps their cause. So do what Brett suggested, which is bring your camera and hashtag. And we should have some fun with this. We can do what the Germans do, which is raise money off of the Nazis, right? That's what they do in Germany.
Yeah, absolutely.
It can be a bit like how Westboro Baptist Church just became not a big deal. People would go out and have a great time protesting the Westboro Baptist Church.
Yeah, for people who don't know what we're talking about, I think it was actually in Austria. There's a specific town which has had a yearly issue with neo-Nazis showing up and doing a march to celebrate a prominent Nazi's birthday. Now, what some activists did is they got together a bunch of money and they sponsored the march so that for every foot they walked, they donate money towards a foundation which would help get people out of extremism. So that took the air out of the movement real quick.
And there's a lot of movements here in the United States which actually work to help those who had identified as Nazis transition out of that. And they actually do fantastic work.
Absolutely.
And so that'd be fantastic to see those who are protesting fascism and the alt-right to actually come up with something that's productive, right? Not just don't go for the violence. It's cathartic perhaps and it's tempting, but we can do better.
Yeah. Show up to protect, show up to make yourself heard.
Protesting's great.
Don't show up looking for a fight. If one comes to you, then defend yourself, do what you can, do what you need to within the bounds of the law, but don't go up and start violence with the white nationalists.
Absolutely. And coordinate with the police. We saw Boston went reasonably well, right? This following Charlottesville, there was the follow-on rally that was supposed to happen in Boston, and the police handled it quite well, I thought. This Week in Science.
Okay, so this week in science, of course, we had the eclipse that just happened. I'm sure most of you went outside and saw it. Did you guys?
Well, I didn't. I was on vacation, and where I was at in Hawaii, we didn't get to see it at all, sadly.
I was about at 89%.
We were at about 95% up in Seattle, so you still couldn't see it with your bare eyes. But for the people that were in the total shadow, when the sun is completely eclipsed by the moon, using the iNaturalist app, we tracked reports, or scientists affiliated with the California Academy of Scientists tracked reports of wildlife changing their pattern. And apparently, not too much happened, although I did hear some significant stories about cicadas becoming active because they thought it was night. But there wasn't any owls flying around and bats coming out of their caves, etc. But mostly it was just human animals watching the eclipse.
That's right. I have some anecdotal evidence that as soon as totality happened and the moon started to move back out of blocking the sun, people in Glendale, Wyoming just started sprinting to their cars hoping to beat the traffic, and they did not.
It's funny how that happens. You know, for our call to action this week, I was wanting to do something a little different because this is our introductory episode of our regular format. So instead of talking about a specific issue like we're normally going to do and telling you what you can do to fix it, I'd like to introduce everybody to what you can generally do to make yourself heard by the decision makers in government. I mean, that's really what political activism is about. Protests are nice, going out and making yourself heard, getting on the news is nice, but what you want to do is you want to be able to influence the actual decisions that are being made. Otherwise, it's just all of us getting out and trying to make ourselves feel like we're doing something. So with that in mind, I have 4 specific ways that have been used to talk to your representatives, all the way from the state legislature all the way up to the federal government. And I'd like everybody who listens to this to get familiar with at least a few of them. The traditional stand-in has always been giving a call to your local representative and sending a letter, or something very traditional. And that kind of action is still effective. However, what I will say is that when you're calling a federal government office, generally what you're going to get, instead of talking to your actual representative, you're going to be talking to a staff, and they will note your opinion on an issue and then report the number of people that called in with that opinion to your representative for them to take into account as they make their decision. Now, it's still an effective way of doing it, and it's actually fairly easy to give a call to your representatives and your representative and your senators. But there are other ways that people have been making a difference. Probably the best way to do it is showing up and actually talking to them at a town hall. Have either of you guys ever done that before?
No, I haven't.
I've gone to a town hall, but I never talked.
Right.
It didn't get to me.
There is an excellent resource called the Town Hall Project. You can find it at townhallproject.com, and we'll be putting up a link to this on our Facebook page. But essentially what it does is it takes your zip code and it figures out if there are any upcoming town halls from your representatives near you. And you can RSVP to those, you can show up, and you can actually talk to your representative without the filter of anybody standing in between you. And that's one of the most powerful ways to do it. So give that a try, but not everybody wants to actually show up and talk to somebody in person. So I have 2 specific ways with which you can interact with your representatives. One is actually called ResistBot. Have you guys ever heard of it?
Yes, I have.
I haven't.
Facebook Messenger.
So I've been using ResistBot for a while. Essentially what it does, you text a specific number on your phone, and you send a message to that number with whatever you want to send your representative, and he converts it into a fax. Now, it's really easy for somebody to ignore an email, which is why I'm not even mentioning sending them an email. But it's a little harder when you've actually got a fax machine that's spitting out a piece of paper that somebody has to do something with. So I've actually been using ResistBot for a while. You can contact your governor with it, your state governor. You can also contact both your representative and both of your senators, and give that a try. Beyond that,
I think I'll just point out, I think the ResistBot thing is good too for people who might not be as comfortable, on the phone or in person, but you still want to have, your voice heard.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just
not everybody, if you've got some social anxiety, if you're not the best speaker, maybe you don't have the time, you don't have the inclination, you work during business hours, it's okay. You can still get engaged with activism just by sending a text message, and it's completely free. So
when I can, I like to safely call during my commute. It's kind of a nice thing to talk to. They're very pleasant people in the offices. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I should say is when you're talking to your representative or you're talking to their staffers, be polite, be reasonable. Don't yell at them or don't get angry at them, because they really are just people who signed up to make a difference in most cases. Sometimes maybe not your legislator, your congressman. We can be a little suspect of their motives sometimes, but typically the staffers are people who are just trying to make a difference in America.
And you know what we really have to recognize is that congressmen and women are people, and what they generally want is to get reelected. As we saw with the Obamacare repeal completely failing so many times, when the public is passionate about something, they can make quite a difference.
Absolutely. So the final way that I wanted to talk about is Facebook Town Hall. Have either of you guys taken advantage of that feature of Facebook?
I've seen it. I actually haven't joined one, though.
Yeah, I haven't tried it.
So Facebook Town Hall is a terrific way of getting in touch with your state representatives. So what it does, you can put in your exact address into Facebook, and it will look up who your representatives are all the way from your local state legislature up through the federal government, including the President of the United States. With one button, you can follow every single person that represents you in government through all those different steps. And the reason I mention this is you can actually use Facebook now to get in touch with your state representatives through Facebook Messenger. And I've actually been taking excellent advantage of this. My local representatives, both of them in my old district and the new one that I'm moving to, they've gotten a little tired of me talking to them all the time. But you're actually talking to them, not to a staffer. So
I've had good luck with this as well. Just contacting them.
I didn't know it was called Town Hall, because when I've gone to individual reps' pages and I've followed them or joined their page or whatever, when I've made comments or posts, I noticed it puts a little badge next to my name saying that I'm a constituent.
I just noticed that if you go to facebook.com/townhall, and town hall is all one word, it'll bring up your representatives if Facebook knows where you are.
Yes.
If you want to use the Facebook Town Hall, just go to facebook.com/townhall, and town hall is one word, and it should bring up your representatives, and you may have to adjust your address to get the accurate ones. We're going to be sharing on our Facebook page a little infographic, and we're going to ask how you contacted your representatives this week. And so we hope you will do that.
And, my suggestion is to reach out and talk to them about DACA, since we talked about that a little earlier in the show. So just let them know that you think it's important and that you'd like to see them do what they can to support the program.
Even if you're against DACA or for it, we recommend that you contact them and let them know. Just let them know what it is you're thinking about this program. Do your research first, of course. Be informed, but let them know.
Yeah, I was going to say, for those that are in support of it, maybe we can all have a community tagline called "Don't Ditch DACA," right?
Ooh, don't ditch DACA. I like that. Is that alliteration? Hopefully we'll manage to alliterate every call to action.
That would be cool.
We want to leave you with our quote of the day.
I dream of a world where the truth is what shapes people's politics, rather than politics shaping what people think is true. That's from Neil deGrasse Tyson, astrophysicist.
Hey Nation, we want to hear from you, our listeners, so go ahead and reach out to us on Facebook or give us a call at 202-681-2274. We might even play you on the show. Politics Within Reason is a project of the Party of Reason and Progress, a registered 527 political organization. Don't forget to rate us on iTunes or whatever you use to listen to your podcasts. Thanks for your support, and until next week, this is Politics Within Reason.